We're going to talk about low-wage tech workers and getting justice for them. I'd like to bring up Derecka Mehrens of Silicon Valley Rising, Y-Vonne Hutchinson of ReadySet, Jenny Morales, she works at Cisco, and of course, our moderator, Ryan Lawler.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to grab this first seat. So, yeah. Awesome. So thanks, everybody, for coming back from lunch, those of you who are here. Those who aren't, we'll shame them later on. So in this panel, we're going to talk about some of the issues related to low-wage tech work. We're going to bucket that into a few different issues. To start, I want to talk about contract employees or subcontractors within the tech space. These are normally people who work in service jobs, whether it's janitors or food service, shuttle bus drivers, security. Typically, they're not employed by the companies themselves, but subcontracted out. Today, Jenny Morales has joined us, who has one of those jobs. And so I just want to kick it off by asking Jenny about her experience, where she works now, and how conditions were when they start out and how they've changed over the last few years.
Right. So yeah, I'm Jenny. I'm from Redwood City. Had to move away in the 3rd grade because of rents going up because of tech. If we're real about that. Moved and commuted every day. So I guess that's my first experience with the tech boom and everything. But yeah, fast forward to I work for Cisco or our subcontractor Airmark. Before we started organizing, a lot of people, it's an old tech company, I would say. So I've had my coworkers have been there 15, 20 years. Never really saw much of a raise, maybe 10 cents. A lot of my coworkers had to move out to the Central Valley and commute. So things like not being paid enough, health insurance was extremely expensive. And just I guess the emotional and physical, all depends management and the engineers itself, just the way we are treated, just because we're, I guess, the bottom of the, I don't know what you want to call it. But yeah, it's just the treatment, that's how it kind of was. I personally got very depressed very quickly working in these cafeterias because it was just the emotional abuse and just the way I was treated. But yeah, we organized, and it was amazing just to see the change within management, just the way that we were being treated.
So I'm curious how you started to organize, or what was the impetus there? What was the catalyst that brought your particular group within Cisco to start organizing?
Right. So first what I heard of was Intel. They had organized, they put up a fight, they had 2 rallies, they took it to a whole other level, which I think was amazing because it was the catalyst, and it moved on. When we started organizing at Cisco, they didn't, I'm assuming they didn't want that kind of public fight out there, and they also care for the community. So, sorry. So when we organized, we asked that we wanted the fair process to organize a union, and Cisco made it happen.
Okay, so Derecka, as part of your organization, you've been sort of helping out and leading the charge with a lot of these organization efforts. Can you just sort of zoom us out and give a little bit of background, sort of where things are and what you've been working on?
Yeah, no problem. So I work for an organization called Working Partnerships that for 20 years has been in the Valley looking at how we can push back on this narrative that the Silicon Valley economy is working for everyone, because it's not. 1 out of 3 families in Silicon Valley still does not earn enough to survive. Even if all 1.1 million low-wage workers in the Bay Area economy had PhDs, there's no job for them. Our middle-wage jobs are only expected to be about 300,000 jobs over the next decade, so they wouldn't have a job. They couldn't move up. So Silicon Valley Rising really came out of this idea that we had to not only push to create middle-wage jobs, but we had to upgrade the conditions of low-wage work, especially in profitable industries, right? So the tech sector is a very profitable industry, it turns out. And for every 1 coding and engineering job created, there's another 4 jobs created in the regional economy, and not all of them are great. So our campaign was really about pushing back to upgrade the conditions in these and make sure that folks can share in the wealth that's being created.
So I want to sort of get some more information about where the areas of responsibility are.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, when you talk about all these jobs that are created, they're not created by the companies sort of directly. They're typically subcontracted out. And so it makes a weird power dynamic between the workers who are employed in these jobs and the major tech companies, which make a lot of money but don't technically have any responsibility for those workers, correct?
Don't legally, that's
don't
right.
Legally,
yeah.
Legally, which sure, we can change laws. So yeah, that's exactly right. There's this dynamic where because we don't have a system right now, what we believe we should do is have a responsible contracting system where tech companies decide that there should be a higher floor than the minimum wage, than the basic floor. Because what happens right now is that even a union employer now, like Aramark, they get undercut by low-wage and low-road contractors in the field, right? And so the market for the service is actually created by the tech company itself, which pays the wages. If we get increased wages or increased costs on the labor side, it gets paid by Apple, Google, Facebook, right? And so really, you have a condition where while the laws say that they're not the employer, the money is coming from, it's the tech supply chain, right? And it's part of, if Apple hires 10,000 new engineers in Cupertino, we need teachers, we need people to build the roads, we need restaurant workers. There's an effect, cause and effect to that.
Right.
Yeah. And just to sort of jump in, I think we shouldn't treat the hiring of subcontractors like it's a foregone conclusion, right? Companies choose how they want to structure their workforce, right? And so why is it that we're not only seeing it on the unskilled side, but the skilled side, this moving towards precarious labor arrangements? I think it's a very important question to ask.
That's exactly right.
Right. No, it's fine. I'm glad you were bringing yourself into the conversation. And when we talk about that, a lot of the conversation comes around 1099s. Now, when people think about 1099s, we can talk about 1099s in the sense of like gig economy startups and the companies that are sort of funded in that way. But there's also a classification problem, and that's what I hope Y-Vonne can speak to a little bit more.
Great. Well, I think it dovetailed with what I just said, which is that companies are choosing to structure their workforces in ways that are fundamentally untenable, right? So if you have to rely on contractor labor to build your company, to have it be profitable, and that contractor labor is performing the same job and spending the same amount of time as a full employee, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the model. And what we're seeing now is a lot of companies, and this is part of a global trend, going towards precariousness in how they structure their labor, right? They say we don't want to spend money on benefits, we don't want to have this liability for our employees, so let's just all outsource it. Let's just use independent contractors and third-party subcontractors. And it might not even, I don't even think it's totally legal, but it certainly is part of like something that's much bigger. And I think it's also concerning.
Right. One of the topics that always comes up in these discussions whenever these things are brought up is minimum wage. And for a lot of people, I feel like raising the minimum wage is seen as like a panacea to solve these problems. I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on, does a higher minimum wage actually help to solve some of these issues?
Sure, it helps. It's not enough, though. Right? So I think it's great that California is moving to a $15 minimum wage. Silicon Valley Rising has fought for $15 minimum wage by 2019, 3 years faster than the state, and won it in 7 cities in Silicon Valley. But we got to go further. And the reality is the money is there, and it's not trickling down.
I also think that minimum wage is fine, but it seems to me like there's also not really a pathway to growth, right? So, it's still, we're relying on there is this kind of presumption that it's okay that we have these two classes of workers, which is really problematic, especially when one class of workers looks a lot more diverse, and it has a lot less privileges than another class of workers. So I think minimum wage is great, but if there's not a pathway to growth for both the employee that's currently in the role and then the employee's kids and everybody else in the employee's community that wants to access these jobs, then there's still a real problem.
Right. I also want to bring it back to this idea of the housing crisis. Jenny, you spoke about this a little bit early on, but I think what you were referring to was previous, the Silicon Valley housing crisis is not a new phenomenon, is what I'm trying to get at. And the idea that now in Silicon Valley, for so many people in the workforce, it's unaffordable to actually live here, and increasingly people are being pushed out. What does that mean for the workforce just in general, but also the Bay Area as a whole?
Right. Well, like I mentioned before, like a lot of my coworkers have had to go into the Central Valley, move because it's cheaper there, and then commute to work every day. So like even if we do get like minimum wage or whatever, like it still doesn't add up because we're still commuting every day, and then we have other things we have to pay for. So it's just like this big thing, right? So. And
just to put that into perspective for those who maybe might not be, based here or of Silicon Valley, like what it means to live in the Central Valley and commute up here.
Central Valley is like it's where we get our vegetables and fruits from, right? It's like, at least from Cisco, I think it may be like 2 hours away. Wow. And we already know how much traffic has increased here. So like I even remember when having to commute to school, like it was like this whole pattern where I would get home until like 8 p.m. I was so tired, I have to wake up at like midnight to do my homework and then go to sleep for 3 hours, wake up at like 5 and then commute. And like it was like, it's like not only affecting like my coworkers, it's affecting their kids, and like it's this whole trickling effect, right?
Right. And I think what we see is that it then becomes systematic. Right?
That's right. I mean, these are problems that are real policy problems, but they're also it's a question of power. Right? I mean, partly why Silicon Valley Rising and the work of Jenny and her coworkers is so important is that working people do not have a resourced and organized way to get to the table with these companies. And until they have that, until their voice is heard around what the impact is on this economic model, on their housing, on their wages, on their families, we're not going to come up with equitable solutions that work. And to your point, we're not going to have the power to say, actually, we're all workers, y'all. Yeah. And like how we distribute the costs across our economy for healthcare for everyone, et cetera, these legal mechanisms of independent contractor W-2 don't matter. What matters is that the economy should be in service of us, not the opposite.
And I think to your point, what we see, to both of your points actually, with this physical displacement, it's not just economic displacement, it's also political displacement. You talk about power. Totally. If you're no longer somebody's constituency, their core constituency, why would they listen to you when it comes to making sure that they build affordable housing or making sure that that there's not employment discrimination going on, right?
That's exactly right.
And I think there are two levels of issues. There's the very sort of hyper-local issues where we can solve some of these problems through local organizing, which is the work that you're doing. And then, there's the bigger national problem, which is part of the reason that this is untenable is that there's no social safety net. And so I'm wondering, from a larger perspective, what work can be done to, provide help to the most vulnerable people, not just in this area, but throughout the U.S.
I mean, that's a big question. That's sort of like, what are we going to do when the robots come and we all need a universal basic income, but nobody wants to pay for it? I think it's a question of power. So it's a question of, can we make sure that we're building the kinds of democratic institutions based in working people's lives that can leverage and get to the table with those in power, policymakers and industry. We can't do this without industry. To say, we're going to solve the problems of automation and of the future of work and of our social safety net, but we're going to talk about redistribution of wealth when we do it, because who's going to pay? The government doesn't have the money unless the industry pays, right? And we're going to make sure that as we think about those policies, working people have a say in what happens.
Yeah, I think, the whole reason why I'm sitting up on this panel, I didn't do the introduction, but I used to be an international labor rights activist, right? So I worked with sugarcane workers in Nicaragua who were dying from occupational illness. And a lot of those things, it like really disturbs me to see that a lot of those trends are happening here now. And one of the things that we saw there was that we had these laws on the books. We had these protections on the books. Nobody was enforcing anything, right? And I think that that's still a problem here. It's a problem for us, right? Like if we want to talk about employment discrimination, employer misclassification, you know, if we want to talk about depressed wages and access to affordable housing, there are protections out there, but there's also sort of this inertia in terms of like the regulatory bodies that are charged with enforcing them. So until we can actually enforce what we currently have and prioritize what we have, we can't really look at like what we're going to be doing in the future, right?
Right. From a practical standpoint, how do we push back, or how do we start getting more enforcement of the things that we have on the books, moving forward for more workers' rights? What are the things that the people in this room can start doing?
I mean, I mean, we took it. Like, we were like, these are, like, in the handbook, like, why aren't they being enforced? So, like, my coworkers and I got together and we organized together. And, like, we delegated our boss and was like, we demand, like, respect and, like, just the right to live and to exist, because like it doesn't even feel like we even exist anymore. Like a lot of my coworkers like have been beat down for so long that that's all they know. So it is really hard. It's a hard conversation trying to be like, hey, like this isn't okay. Like this is not normal. And it's like amazing to watch. Like a lot of my coworkers are older, so it's like they're like my mom and my dad. So like to see them be upfront and just be like, no, we're taking like our respect back and like just our right to live. Like it's been amazing. And like I could have stopped like at my shop, because my shop, like we won and we're currently in negotiations. Like she said, we're now at the table negotiating with our boss, like our contract and stuff. I could have stopped, but I think like this is something that needs to keep going, and I'm like helping with the next one, and like I don't want to stop. Like I think this needs to keep going, and I guess that in the small scale, I'm being able to help with there's others. I mean, it's not just me, but yeah.
Yeah, I always think of it like it's hard. Labor protection is really hard because there's not a lot of levers. We like to think there are, but there aren't that many. But there are two that are proven to work and that continue to work. And I like frame it as dollars and feet, right? Like if you don't buy these services, like delete Uber or boycott Uber had like real impact, right? Like if you don't use these company services, that's a great way to get them to listen to you. Like the boycott worked with Nike. I mean, it works. But also, if you don't work for these companies, right? For those of you who have talents that these companies compete over, don't go to them, right? Like say, like actually, it's kind of a black mark on my resume if I work for a company that doesn't respect all of its other workers, right? Like these companies care about their images and their brands, and most of their brands revolve around we're innovative, we're inclusive, we're forward thinking. So reframe that, right? I think those are the two big leverage points that I see.
And we've seen a ton of success when workers do just that, not just subcontracted workers, but since the new administration has taken over, we've seen tech workers step out and in front. And I know Catherine talked about that earlier today. There is enormous power in the potential solidarity between organized subcontracted workers and the tech talent to leverage. They will listen in a whole new way if we are on the same page and we're asking about each other's issues and we're building relationships, get to know your cafeteria worker. Yeah. Right? I mean, they will listen.
Okay. Well, I have run out of questions. I think that's probably as good of a place to leave as any. So I thank you guys for being on the panel here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.